Welcome to the Evolving Spiritual Practice podcast. My name is Ralph Cree. This is brought to you in association with bodyheartmindspirit.co.uk. This is the part 2 of my conversation with Trilby Fairfax about voice dialogue. We didn't have enough time in the first session, first talk, to do the topic justice, so we booked in a part 2. Trilby has been working with voice dialogue for over 40 years. She's facilitated probably many thousands of sessions for people. And I've done training with her, which was amazing, a few years back. Voice dialogue is a psychotherapeutic technique where you work with subpersonalities, which are called voices. And the premise being that we are made up of kind of blend of subpersonalities. And we have some personalities which we're very familiar with, and some that we aren't, and some which through our childhood become dominant, and others that are not so in play. And we can learn to through voice dialogue facilitation to become more free and able to move around these different subpersonalities and respond to life with a wider palette of colours. And this is sort of in contrast to the sort of the view of the self as a mono self, like we're just one thing. And I've found it a very, very useful technique, and also way of looking at what human beings are. So hope you enjoy part 2. So Trilby Fairfax, welcome back for part 2 of our conversation. We didn't quite have enough time to do the topic justice last time. And so, yeah, anyone listening or watching, I'd recommend you go and listen to part 1, because that sets up this conversation. And we'll be talking about things that we talked about, referring back to things we talked about in part 1. So it'd be a good idea to listen to that one first. So, yeah, I've introduced who you were and all of that stuff in part 1, so we won't cover that ground again.
I'm just going to say I've been passionate about voice dialogue for more than 40 years. I'd just like to say that. That's a lovely way to come into the conversation. Yeah,
I think because in our last conversation, you talked about how you got into the work, but you didn't say quite when it was.
Oh, did I not? Oh, that was in 1987.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's about 45. I don't know. I don't even want to count, but that's quite a long time, isn't it? Yeah.
I was listening to 80s rap music on my Walkman back in those days.
Yeah. It's a completely different time.
And I love your story about how you got into voice dialogue. It's an example of when someone, even by accident, like a small event happens in your life, and then suddenly that becomes your main interest for 40 years, and it's, you'd never realize at the moment it happens, and it sort of encourages people to be open-minded to things that happen in their life, like, because you never know that it might lead into something huge.
Yes, and it's a strange thing, because it felt very light. I picked it up. I thought, this looks good, and then I rang, and then I asked a friend to come with me, and we went. It wasn't like, this is significant.
Yeah.
And that's what you mean, really, isn't it?
Yeah. So sometimes people they feel like they've got to look out for the significant thing, like you say. It's like it's got to feel very, very vibrant or ominous or something, but it's not always the case. There is that the small things happen too, and I think it's just about being open-minded is what I was saying. Yeah.
And it's a real lesson, Ralph. If you're promoting your work, put the flyers out everywhere, because it was a flyer I picked up.
Yes, there we go.
And I thought, oh, this is good, I'll go to this, and in that way it's that smaller thing that suddenly turns out to be a life-changing event. No,
I like it. And so one thing that I like about voice dialogue is it's a kind of, so children play around with their identity and playing different roles, different selves. I had loads of different styles of handwriting. I tried different ways of speaking. I tried different hairstyles. I kind of like tried out all the like lots of different ways to speak, and children are very fluid with their sense of self. And then something happens where you become an adult and you're supposed to adopt a mono self. And I think voice dialogue is a kind of, it's a continuation of that playfulness with identity that children have. And
yes, I would say some children, not all. I remember finding in my sort of ancient post keep, the things I keep, finding a postcard I wrote to my mother when I was staying with my grandmother when I was about 5, when I could only just write, and it was all about being a good girl. It was all about how I was being good and helping Granny. And I also found a letter she wrote to me when I was staying with the other grandparents, and that was all about what I had to do to be a good girl. And so this sense of being the pleasing good girl left me not so much space to play with my roles, because I wasn't meant to be noisy, and I wasn't meant to usurp my sister, who was older, and I was cleverer and more musical and more chatty and extrovert than her. So I had to all the time remember to be good and not to be who I really was, or that playfulness or experimenting. I don't remember that at all. It's interesting you're saying this, because we did that later when we played outside and we became horses and we became wild. But in that first part of my life, I wasn't playing around very much. I was desperately trying to be accepted by being this very, very good little girl.
And in the first part of our conversation, you were describing that and how that became a primary self. Within your self system, a very, very strong one.
Yes.
That you kind of work to soften up, I suppose, over time.
Oh, yeah. Well, we call it disidentify, but soften up. It means that the more you explore that and realize the reasons for becoming that good girl, that caring girl, the one who helped her sister, who was a year older, to cross the road in London when we moved there, and it was really busy. It was me who helped her. I had to look after my sister. And she was a year older, okay? And softening that, which is a lovely way of putting it, the energy becomes softer and more flexible as we work with that, as we get to know that good little caring girl inside me, as I get to know, then suddenly the pain that led to me identifying with that part, led to me becoming that part, also becomes clear that if I were to be different, then I would have got frowned upon, disapproved of, maybe even sent to my room. So the pain of the fear of being something different, which might be more authentic. Once you get to know that and work through it, then you become freer. Identification softens, and then I can actually be that loud little girl, or that loud big person, or the one who talks a lot like I'm doing now, or whatever, Yeah.
Well, that brings me on to something which I've done with you, and I also have noticed that Hal and Sidra Stone do this, is working with opposites. That it's a very simple, it's quite a good rule of thumb, so to speak, where so there are some voices, when I've been facilitated in voice dialogue, there are some voices I can slip into really, really easily, and there are other ones that feel completely dead to me, and I can't even access it. And sometimes that might be the opposite of a voice I'm very familiar with. And I think, you know, I'm very much into integrating harmony and you know, balance, and those kind of modes of being. And so I think working with opposites is a very important to do. So you were sort of describing that there.
Yeah, but in your case, then it would be more like disharmony or conflict or chaos, or what would be the opposite to working with harmony?
Oh, I see.
For you, yes.
Yeah. Well, you know, disharmony, chaos, entropy, all of those kind of things. Yeah.
And so that for you is an unknown, it's a shadow area. Whether as I liked what you wrote about the dark shadow or the golden shadow. There's aspects of that are also golden shadow. If you can be chaotic, that's where the chaos is the archetype that is the birthplace of creativity, because you start to think laterally and you do things in a completely unexpected, chaotic way for the structure or harmony part. It's not harmonious, and yet it might lead you to some amazing creative discovery.
Well, that's so that in our last conversation, I think I was tending to emphasize the darker side of our disowned selves, but there is this, you know, and that's actually quite common for people to emphasize. That when people talk about shadow, they tend to emphasize, you know, they're talking about the darkness, the kind of underworld side of us, but then there is this correlate, which is the golden shadow, which is you know, the classic example would be someone meets a guru and they project all of their own goodies onto that guru and fall in love with the bits that they so want inside themselves, but they're there, but they just haven't accessed them. And so, you know, that's and that can happen. Some of these disowned selves, you know, when I was saying that, you know, you can be in facilitation, you can end up in a voice that you can barely access it, and that could be a very positive and golden, or, you know, luminous side of yourself. And I mean, is there anything you want to unpack about that?
I think this applies to everybody, that some things, some qualities that they may have deeply buried in themselves and haven't been able to access will become amazing, you know, contribute amazingly to their life experience if they're allowed to access them. Something like taking risks. If you've been brought up very, very safely and not ever allowed to go out on your bicycle on your own, and disowning taking risks, from risk taking from a child place, that suddenly when you're an adult and you start to play the unsafe card, you play the risk card, and that could bring you to enormous adventures, and also it might bring you up to rock climbing and hanging, you know, in a crevice and doing these amazingly dangerous things that you wouldn't otherwise have been able to do if you'd stuck to that where you were brought up. And I would call that a golden shadow, going on adventures, I suppose being an intellectual if you're brought up in a family where, or being a classical musician in Pete's family, for instance, when a classical singing came on the radio, his father used to say, "Turn that squawking off." Classical singing, because he didn't like the sort of that was squawking. So if your family said that about classical singing, and then that later turns out that you become an amazing opera singer, you could call that a golden shadow in yourself, so that you actually were that amazing singer that your parents disapproved of. They called it squawking. There's loads of examples of this, of the things. Basically, the family system constellates a lot of archetypes that are accepted in that particular family. For instance, again, in my husband Pete's family, the work ethic was very, very valued. So in his way of being, the work ethic is incredibly constellated. That's slightly different in my family. My father was certainly on the lazy side, because when I met my half brother later on, he could hardly lift a finger to replace a screw or a door handle or something like that. He would say vaguely, "I think I've got to get the landlord in because that door handle's a bit loose." And Pete was looking at him like, there's two different family constellations clashing there, and all that stuff you get in this family of origin. That's a real gift to you later in life, but it does also have the rules that the other side, this is what we're talking about, the polarity, there's something wrong with it. Yeah, so that sometimes, for instance, for my partner, it can be good to think, well, that's broken now, and you know what, we're not going to mend it at the moment. Maybe I'll do that next week, or maybe I'll ask Trilby to do it, or maybe we won't mend it. I mean, that for him isn't, it's completely unknown shadow area, but it could give him some relaxation.
Yeah, well, I can definitely relate to that. I see
Really,
something and it's got to be done now.
Exactly.
And by me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. Got to be done now and by me. There's a lot in there, isn't there? Yeah. There's that control, must happen now, and also the sort of omnipotence of it. Yeah, there's a lot in that identification. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that so on this kind of golden shadow side of things, the big mind process, which is how I got into voice dialogue in the first place. They with that, in that process, it being a Zen Buddhist of Zen Buddhist origin, they explore what you might call transpersonal voices. And we've talked a little bit, you and I talked a little bit about archetypes in part one, and archetypes are kind of transpersonal, and in a way you could say all of these selves are transpersonal because they all live inside all of us, and there's a kind of commonality between all of us. But I'm talking about a transpersonalness which is something slightly different, like being God, or being the goddess, or being big mind in Zen, which is the that kind of formless awareness, or being Gaia. I mean, I don't know, some of these more religious archetypes.
So when I work with archetypes, goddess archetypes, or god or goddess archetypes, it's easier for me to think or to speak in terms of the god or goddess coming through in the person or in me, and not being that. You become, I'm sort of sitting here. This is the lovely thing about this conversation. Your questions lead me to realize things that are less conscious or more like assumptions. So if I'm working with somebody and she's going to a feisty part of herself, let me take a sort of an example. In the personal, we've got these circles. We've got the self in the middle, and then we've got the personal circle around that. And then around that, there's more like the collective unconscious. We talked about that last time, the archetypal realm. And so I would be working with somebody, let's say she's called Marianne, and I'm working with Marianne, and she goes to a feisty part of herself, and she really accesses that strength and that anger maybe, and that, not taking no for an answer, not being pushed aside. I'm that part of her. We would call that the personal feisty part, or the personal inner strength, whatever you want to call it. And then at some point, when she accesses the archetypal energy, I'll ask her to move back. That's usually behind, and she'll become, or she'll let the energy of the warrior goddess or the warrior god, usually the goddess if it's a woman, but not always, come through, and suddenly she'll become that. But it won't be a conscious decision. It'll be something that, as a facilitator, you notice this is happening. The transpersonal is starting to come through. And then you really get this sense of the collective nature of the archetypes and the transpersonal nature of an archetype. Quite often an archetype doesn't want to speak. It's just there and you can sense it. It might say something. Very often reluctant to get into conversation because the words detract. The words tend to bring us more back to the personal. And this is more than impersonal, it's transpersonal. Okay, so yeah.
Do you feel it's related to what we used to be called in the old days, spirit possession? Do you think there's any kind of, like I'm thinking of in Tibet, they have oracles that, or in ancient Greece, they'd have oracles they go and see. And well, actually, I'm not so sure about the ancient Greece, but in Tibet, they go and see these oracles. The oracles would sort of, a spirit would come into them and then start speaking. I mean, I don't know whether I'm shoehorning something in.
No, you're not. I'm reading an amazing book by Mac McCartney called The Children's Fire. And in that he describes a Celtic ritual, as I understand it, from a couple of centuries back. I don't know where he accesses this information, but in this, I think I've got it right. In this tradition, I'm worrying now that I've got it confused with a different book, but it doesn't really matter because the point is, in the tradition, when a child is chosen or singled out or seen to be a seer, to have that quality, then she's kept in a cave with soft light and very soft noise for the first 9 years of her life and cared for, so that when she emerges into the world, she sees the world as new and she hears the world as new, and she becomes the one who has been kept and become this person who's so used to the lack of impressions that when she does come out into nature and hear sounds and see things, that she's just celebrating the glory of it all, and she's the one who can see and hear in that way. And like in the Aborigine tradition, those who have this role have dreams at night, and the dreams are then the dreams that on the basis of which decisions are taken. So in many different cultures throughout the world, but I particularly like this example because it was from the Celtic tradition, which is our tradition. We're English, that this person who has an almost spiritual function in the community is brought up in this way so that they will have that access to spirit and the access to those different channels of information kept intact.
Yeah, like a specialist in that area. But
yes,
do you? So that's those kind of, that sort of, I don't know, you might call it channeling or something. Channeling.
I would call it channeling.
Yeah. It seems to be quite a bit related to voice dialogue.
Definitely.
But voice dialogue has the difference being that you are not doing it on your own. You're with a facilitator who's helping you move around these different voices or sub-personalities. I don't know, it's not something I've looked into in great detail, but there seems to be some kind of, if you could draw some kind of link through time, it may meander.
I could say something about it. I could say something about it more. When I or somebody else starts to do voice dialogue, very often we're in the more personal realm of working through some of the painful stuff that happens as you grow up. This is quite a big generalization, but I think you know where I'm coming from. So there'll be stuff around relationship with one of your parents, or maybe losing a parent or grandparent or sibling rivalry, or whatever's actually went on in the family of origin or in the school or in the culture. So that stuff, this is not so, certainly not for everybody, but that tends to take precedence in the beginning. But as the soul, as that deeper part of you that becomes freer from the traumatic pain that you may have experienced as a youngster, then the wider circle of the more archetypal and the more what you're calling spirit energies becomes more accessible. And this is an enormous generalization, because some people can go straight in there and they've just started voice dialogue and you think, where did they get that from? Some people have always had that accessible as a child. Others haven't. Others have been punished for it as a child. I had one client who could see her little brother's pain, could see it as energy in his body and could take it away with her hands. But when she tried to do it because he was hurting, her mother slapped her and told her not to be silly. She was 5 and he was 3. You know, that's an example of how there are people who have enormous access to a completely different realm of energy, and other people don't. And the more I was somebody who didn't have that particularly as a child at all. But the more and more I've done voice dialogue, and having been doing it for all these many years that we haven't counted now, but they're quite a long time, I'm getting more access to that realm. And dreams, that's another lovely thing. Dreams are very much a way into that. So if you're working with a dream you've had and the dream is showing you something, you haven't got a clue what it is, but you start to work with it. We say in voice dialogue, everything in the dream is something that you can work with as a part of yourself. So if there's a really rackety old truck that's trying to drive you up, and you're trying to drive it up a mountain, or there's somebody else driving, it doesn't really matter, then you can work with the rackety old truck as a part of yourself, and you go into it and sense it and feel it, or you become the driver, or you're the other person in the truck, or you're the animal that suddenly runs out and gets hit by the truck. I'm making up a dream, this isn't a real one. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So all the aspects in a dream, in the end, are these really rich sources of information for you to access something in yourself. And we're talking about shadow, golden shadow, darker shadow. It could be the bear that's pursuing you again and again in that recurring dream until you one day turn around and face it. Become the bear, become the one who wants to devour everything in sight, or become the rackety old truck, or whatever it may be. And then suddenly a new realm of experience is available to you.
Yeah, and I think I like the voice dialogue way of working with a dream. It seems a bit more hands-on than the talk therapy version. You know, like I'm thinking of that kind of stereotypical image of going to see your psychiatrist lying down on a couch and then telling your dream, and you know, they help you unpack it, kind of thing. But voice dialogue is a little bit like it's not quite on the level of drama therapy or like acting out the characters in your dreams, but it's becoming them. Yeah, there's a big difference between acting out and becoming. Right. Yeah, and that's really important. Yeah, could you unpack that a bit, please? Okay. Yeah. I've distracted myself because I was about to say something else, but I can't remember now. Let's see which one I'm going to go for. Okay, let's put it on hold. I'd like to speak a bit about the middle position in ego strength and when it's not appropriate to work with voice dialogue. But I'll put that one on hold and go to what I've just said. Remind me. Yeah, I'm writing it down so we can remember. No, but remind me of what we were just talking about. Oh, yeah. It was. Oh no, I've forgotten. Oh yeah. So. Oh, you were talking about the more fluid. Yeah. Yes, you've got drama therapy, what might be acting out your dreams, but voice dialogue. You know, that's on one end of the one extreme, and then the other extreme is you're lying on your couch talking to your psychiatrist. You know, kind of talk therapy. Voice dialogue is something different to both of those. And you were saying there's a difference between acting out and and becoming. So I'm a real advocate of, in the beginning, when you just start the work, okay, and you're going into anger and whatever it might be, sadness, it might be
a creative part of yourself. It might be something unknown to you. To get to know that, you might have to act it out. You might want to act it out. You might want to shout and scream. You might want to, do a lot of things. And in the end, when you've worked with these parts for long enough, you come much more to what I find in the writings of Pema Chodron. She writes about experiencing distress or experiencing anger rather than acting it out. And that's the energetic experience. So I've got to this stage that when I'm angry about something, when I feel anger rising, I feel this flame inside me. It's this amazing that's happening. I feel no desire to go and break something or shout at somebody at all. I feel a real strength in, this is alive in me. My fire is burning strong. And then when I felt that fire for a while, then I get to that point where, what am I going to do with this? What would be the decision I want to take now? Which part of this do I want to show to another person? And that is the most wonderful freedom. Because this thing about emotions is that they are our life force. So that for me, the tears are the river of the soul, and the anger is the fire of the soul. And yet, if I lose myself in acting them out, in the end, I may lose contact with them because I make myself vulnerable to other people. And so in a voice dialogue session, time and time again, getting to know that anger, getting to know that sadness, getting to know the rebellious part or the curious part who goes out into the world and finds out about things. Getting to know those parts mean that you become those energies very gradually. They become parts of you that are so familiar and so, it's like going back to that mountain with all the caves or a house with all these rooms. Oh yeah, I've been in this house such a long time. I know that room. There's that fire again. It's a beautiful experience.
Yeah, so that one of the things I was sort of talking about in the first part of our conversation is that people might worry about acting out different voices. If you were to explore some different voices, someone might say, well, how would I be able to explore, let's stick with rage, with anger or something, without suddenly becoming really angry? But what you're saying is that the facilitation process directs you more towards becoming familiar, gradually making friends, getting to know these sides of yourself over time. So you're kind of going in the shallow end and just working with it, in a kind of sensible pace. Whereas I'm thinking about some of those types of therapy that were very popular in the 70s with, that kind of acting out your anger and I think,
I did that first. Co-counseling, you mean, hitting cushions and stuff.
There we go. That's it. Yeah.
That was great as well. But I think maybe part of my process was that I did that for a few years, and so that some of the anger had got out there. So I don't want to judge. I think if you're getting to know these things for the first time, you need to be able to rage and shout and bang things or whatever. That's fantastic. I'm not against that. But in the end, when I'm working in voice dialogue with an angry part, and somebody's getting to know their anger for the first time, and the warrior will come, the warrior might be incredibly enraged and be acting that out in the session. But the idea is to get to know that energy to such an extent that in your personal life, you can take a stand and be that strength in yourself without having to throw stuff at people or shriek and shout and frighten them. Because that's the whole point. The point is your anger is your strength. It's that fire. And if you've been divorced from it as a child, if you weren't allowed to be it, then you need to get to know it again. And then as an adult, you'll be somebody that somehow people don't mess with you because they know you've got that strength, but you're not shouting at them. And that's where we want to be. All of us have that respect for ourselves and for other people and know that there's that fire is there.
Yeah, it's a bit like when you meet someone who genuinely is a strong person, they don't tend to show it off if you meet someone who does mixed martial arts or something,
yeah,
they're often very gentle, civil people, but they just exude that you know that they could kick your butt, with hardly any effort. But they're not kind of showing it off. And I think when people, it's not always the strongest people that are showing that the force. It's often a vulnerable person who, a bit like a bully at school, is quite often someone who's actually scared and vulnerable, and they're having to overtly show acts of strength. And the kids who are very sure of themselves and actually also strong people, whether physically, emotionally, psychologically, or whatever, they don't tend to feel the need to show it off. And that's sort of the difference between owning something, knowing you have it, versus kind of having a bit of a disconnected relationship with that side of yourself, I suppose, might be.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Again, I'm thinking of my partner. He taught a lot in secondary school and in primary school. And a couple of times now, for a year or two, I was with him in the class because we were doing songwriting with children together. It was lovely. And there was something about his way of being that he never had any problems with discipline with the children. He never had to raise his voice, and he let them be pretty chaotic in a way that I was thinking, hang on, are you still in control of this situation? But I was sitting there because he was leading the class. And then suddenly things would be quiet and they'd all be listening. Well, it's something in the way he looks. I think if he looked at a child, it would be enough for them to know, no messing here.
Yeah, no, I spent enough time around Pete to have picked up on that. Yeah, he just exudes a strength. Yeah.
And he knows that strength very well, having been on the streets in Amsterdam, and he's done the acting out as a child, and now he knows he's got that strength, and he can make sure that things go his way if he needs to. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to raise was the multiple personality disorder.
Yeah, I was thinking of that one as well.
So someone might be, and I haven't forgotten the thing you want to come back to, the middle position.
Well, it's the same thing. It's exactly that. Yeah.
Because just to sort of tee this up, someone might think, well, multiple personality disorder is a real thing. It's an actual disorder. But it's also very, very interesting. Some people with multiple personality disorder can have a sub-personality that needs to wear eyeglasses and one that doesn't. You can have
extraordinary. I didn't know that.
Yeah, you can have sub-personalities that are allergic to strawberries, and ones that are not. So it's extremely interesting. I mean, there's this book called The Future of the Body by Michael Murphy, which has got a load of stuff on that, which I recommend people look at. So, how would you distinguish the kind of healthy, beneficial work, voice dialogue work, and multiple personality disorder as an actual disorder and life deranging condition?
Well, the first thing to say in general is that in voice dialogue, we're careful about working with people with personality disorders in general. And one of the parameters of voice dialogue is that you can work with people to a certain extent, but if somebody has a personality disorder, I might be to I can't remember the English word, pass that person on. You what's the word when you
refer,
thank you, refer that person on to somebody who's more skilled or more in that particular area. I've got an example that that counters that, which I could tell in a minute, which is quite interesting. In the case of MPS, one of the things that we learned in our training was you can only do voice dialogue with somebody if they've got a certain degree of ego strength. Well, what is ego strength? The ego position in voice dialogue is one of those 3 states of awareness I think I described last time. Is the middle position, and ego strength is that you get a sense that somebody has got enough strength in themselves as a person. So I've only once had the experience that I met somebody. It was in France when I was with my colleague assisting him in France, and we were giving people their first session, and there was somebody who'd come to the training course, and I gave him his first session, and this guy was very spiritually oriented, and I sat opposite him and I couldn't actually make contact with him. His eyes, it was as if he was possessed by this spiritual energy. But actually it was quite frightening, and it felt a bit aggressive as well. So in his perception, he was totally one with being. And he wanted just to be that one with being. And I had been trained not to let somebody move into a part unless I had a sense of connection in the middle position. So I stayed the whole session with him in the middle position, and he became being in the middle position. But I didn't have I wouldn't ever have asked him to move into a different part, because I didn't have a sense that he was in touch with a sort of down-to-earth daily life. I can't remember his name. Let's say he was called André. The down-to-earth daily life André, who could just tell me about sort of ordinary things like what car he'd got or where he lived, or didn't seem to be present. And it's quite a difficult thing to define as people are listening to me saying, well, what is ego strength? I think it's that sense of there's a middle position, there's somebody there, that's somebody who could be aware of, well, I don't get angry very often, or I don't like painting, or the one in you that you feel, this is myself. I would call it your Ralphness or my Trilbiness. It's just me. Yeah. And if that's not there, you can't do voice dialogue. And as I understand, but I mean, I'm no expert. I've read different things about MPS, but I'm no expert. But as I understand it, very often when the person becomes one of the personalities, they later don't remember that they were that. That's one of the... Yeah. Yeah, their secret. Can be in terms of Freudian... Yeah, in terms of Freudian defense mechanisms, splitting, it can be completely split off, that multiple. So if somebody's got 3 or 8 or 13 personalities, very often, as they are in one, they are not aware that they have those other ones or who they are. They're just that one. So it's completely split. And that means it's split off from the middle position. So there's no aware ego position. There's no strong self in the middle who has the memory of those different. It's a complete split. Yeah. And that is completely different to voice dialogue, and that is a personality disorder. And there is some interesting work being done with voice dialogue with people who hear voices, but of course that's a different syndrome. That's more what used to be called schizophrenia. I'm not sure whether it still is. And the hearing voices and working with those with voice dialogue, if the person is considered to have enough what we call ego strength, so enough middle position, if that person, instead of splitting off into one of the parts and then not knowing they're in it and not even knowing that they've got another part, if that person can be in the middle and tell you about the different voices they're hearing and what they're telling them to do, then you can, with voice dialogue, access, ask them to maybe not move into, but lean into that voice and find out what that voice is coming, what's happening for that particular voice that's coming and telling them to do these things. And there's been some very successful work done. It started in Nijmegen in Holland. And there's now a whole group of people working with voices with voice dialogue, and that's really exciting work.
Do you think
working with people who hear voices? Yes.
Yeah. Do you think that the voice, rather than being felt as being outside of the person, just gradually feels like it becomes integrated back into their self system?
Exactly. I was just about to say, I realized I hadn't said that. So as you do the work with voice dialogue, with something that has seemed like a separate voice, it will gradually reintegrate into the self. But there's got to be enough self in the middle for that to happen.
Sure. That's
what makes it different to MPS. But anyone with more experience of personality disorders who's listening to me will be aware that I have less information than if I were a trained psychiatrist, which I'm not.
Yeah.
But we're very, very careful with personality disorders of any type when we're working with voice dialogue.
Yeah, I think it applies across the board of therapeutic techniques, whether it's psychedelics and meditation, voice dialogue. There are some psychological conditions people have that need addressing before doing those kind of things, because it can make it far worse. And I think this thing about not remembering a voice that you've gone into, or a subpersonality, that kind of ties a little bit back to the Tibetan oracle example of this sort of spirit possession, that they would have.
That's the possession. Yeah, possession.
They'd have a scribe, an assistant, who would actually write down the stuff that they say.
Yeah.
Because they're basically in a trance.
Yeah.
So when they come out of the trance, they may not quite remember what has gone on, and that's why the assistant is there to sort of help do that. So that is something that is slightly different.
Slightly different again.
One thing, or it's so some of the one thing I don't think you and I are saying, just in case someone listening to this was thinking this, that you have to become proficient in the whole palette of different voices you could imagine. That would be sort of way too shallow, digging loads and loads and loads of very, very shallow holes, rather than going deep in any one of these. And
but there's something before that. You or I, as we allow our process to unfold, can't even begin to decide which voices are going to reveal themselves. I mean, I might come to you as my voice dialogue facilitator and say, look, I've got a problem with assertiveness. That's not very true, actually, but never mind, I'm making up this example. I've got a problem with assertiveness. Can you help me find more connection with my stronger or more assertive parts? And we might work together on that. But neither you as a facilitator or I as the client in this case will know beforehand what's going to happen. Because what we do is we open the possibility for that which is already present to start to reveal itself. And as it starts to reveal itself and becomes more known to you, then it will change as well, like a real person. The first time I met one of my protectors was in a session with Irene, right back in the beginning. Irene was this lovely psychologist who gave me a lot of sessions, and she was quite an elderly lady. And this protector was asleep on the couch behind her. So she was facilitating me like you and I are, opposite to each other. And she said, well, could you move to that protector? And I said, well, it's rather embarrassing, but he's right behind you. He's asleep over there. He said, go on. So I went and lay down on some sort of couch behind her. I'll never forget it. And she was sort of turning her head round to facilitate. And this guy was starting to wake up, and he said, goodness, she's letting me in. I've just been asleep. It's been so boring. It was really funny, but I didn't know that was going to happen. And this is the thing that happens if people come with an agenda. Something completely different might happen, or they might find to go back to my own example about assertiveness, you might find suddenly, oh yeah, that's really working because I'm finding my inner warrior and it's really working, so I can be more assertive in daily life. That could work out, but it could be that something completely different starts to reveal itself. And this is because what we do as we journey with voice dialogue, we start to listen to a whole lot of stuff in ourselves that is part of our journey, but we've never been able to access it. And who is deciding what our journey is? Now we're getting into a lovely area. It's an alchemy. You and I are souls on earth, and there's a sort of alchemy to our being. And I tend to just listen in and find out a lot about what the next step's going to be as I've worked through more of the personal stuff. And yet that personal stuff that was there right from the beginning, in my case being abandoned by my father, will always come through. And I'll know it, but on a different level, it will be, oh yeah, there's that trigger again. And yet what comes when I listen to that trigger will be new. I won't be expecting it. I won't know what it's going to be. If I wait and that unfolds, then all those, you were talking about the shallow graves, lots and lots of things will reveal themselves in their own time, but it's not me coming to you as a facilitator and saying, look, I want to go into every single possible subpersonality of mine, and I think there are about 30. That's not the way it works at all. No, you don't know that.
Yeah, and that's, you know, in the kind of like wellness industry, you know, people like to kind of come and say, right, I need to work on my whatever, and I want to be really compassionate, really rich, you know, assertive, healthy. You know, they just put all of the kind of things that people think of as positive qualities and say, well, I want to work on it. I want to be all of these things, and then shoehorn their practice or whatever they're trying to do, therapeutic technique, into that. And what you're talking about is something much more organic rather than that. It's sort of saying, well, what's here, what's emerging. And I think in a way that's a bit like working with the grain of the wood, you know, of the person. And
I love that. That's a lovely metaphor.
And it's going to be more success if you're working with the natural emergence. You're probably likely to have more success because it's more authentic anyway, you know.
It's even further than that. It goes much further than that even. It's about a total letting go of control. And empowering yourself to have freedom of choice at the same time. How about that? That is not contradictory.
Yes, that's a nice paradox. Well, I think, you know, it's a bit, you know, it's almost cliched, really, that the deeper you go into anything, suddenly it becomes paradoxical, and you just have to suck that up. And just, you know,
well, this whole thing that I'm going through in my own life at the moment, with a partner with cancer, and our whole family over in Holland, which is my life situation at the moment. This is a part of my journey. I've never experienced this. What is going to happen? I don't know. So the more I let go of control and start to listen into what I'm experiencing, whatever grief or uncertainty or whatever it is that's going on for me, then my soul can find its own strength when I listen and receive what is shown to me. Whereas if I have an agenda, you know, people say to you, you've got to be strong when your husband. Well, of course I'm strong, and he's strong. He's great. He's doing really fantastically, and we're strong in our own way because we're both of us able to cry and be with grief when it's too difficult. So that's a part of being strong. It's rather like that lady who I can't remember, who made a great sensation about 10 years. What's it? The Power of Vulnerability. I can't remember her name. It's a fantastic. She did a TED talk on the power of vulnerability, and that I'm a real advocate for that. The more you can be vulnerable when you do feel uncertain or sad or discombobulated, the more you can allow that to be there, the more the strength behind it and in it and under it can unfold. So in this uncertainty of our path together now, there's a whole lot of newness. I'm experiencing a lot of new things that I've never experienced before in my life. And if I were to want to know beforehand where this was going, I wouldn't get to experience all these things.
Yeah, life circumstances bring out different voices at different times. One of the
and hang on, sorry, and a deepening or transforming of voices that are already known to me.
Yes,
which is that is actually the most amazing thing, that you can start, you know parts of yourself pretty well because you've done the work for a while, and suddenly that part you've known in that way will start to transform or deepen, and you can be acting differently because you've got that life situation happening.
Yeah, you'll never get to fully understand a voice or fully, it's never ending nuance. And
well, it's like a real person, if you imagine you and I, and we meet again, we met what was it, 6 or 8 years back, and now like you're Ralph now, and then maybe in 10 years time you're Ralph who's 10 years older. If we meet at those different points in our lives, you'll be different, I'll be different, just simply because of what we've been through. And that happens to the parts inside you as well.
One of the things voice dialogue has really helped me with is when I think about dying, part of me feels like how am I going to be able to do that? And the answer that I get back, having done voice dialogue, is that there's a me that can do dying, and that me will come online when I'm dying. You can
Google it. You just Google my me come online.
Yeah, please come online. Oh no, the connection's broken. No. Bad Wi-Fi signal. But do you know what I mean? Like, I don't have to worry now so much about that, because the circumstances of my dying will reveal aspects of myself or different voices that don't need to be online or accessible through the whole of your life, because you're not dying all the time. It's
that's absolutely it. I wouldn't say it's one me. I would say that it's what we call it an aware ego process. So the middle position is actually an ongoing process of what happens when you become more and more aware of and have new experiences which bring new awareness and new deepening, and that you will be a different Ralph when you start to face dying than you are now, because of all the things that have happened to you. And then if you were to have that experience, rather like my partner's going through, that beforehand something about dying, then that would really affect lots of different parts of you. I wouldn't say, but you may be right. You may, we may speak to each other in the hereafter, whatever you call it in English, and you say, oh yeah, I was a different me who died. I wouldn't say that. I would say that you would become, from the different parts of you who are changing and adjusting to the new situation, you would have a different aware ego process going on in you, which would be enabling you to become a Ralph who can approach dying in a way that feels congruent for you.
Yeah.
Including the grief and the rage or whatever it might be about, I don't want to die. That's going to be part of it. But holding that, it's going to hone you. It's going to shape you. It's going to craft you, going with the grain of your wood, as that lovely metaphor you used just now. I wouldn't say it would be one me, one voice.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's always a collection of a blend. but I think it's given me faith in you know, the blend of my who I am, you know, responding to different life circumstances, because I'm not this fixed mono self. I feel like I'm a self that can adapt to changing life circumstances. And there's this thing I keep thinking about. I haven't actually watched the film, but it's I can't even remember what it's called now, but this guy falls down a canyon and gets his arm trapped, and he's basically going to die there, but he saws his own arm off with a penknife, and escapes and lives. And I remember
his arm gets trapped in a crevice, so it's the only choice he's got. Blimey,
and I remember thinking, oh man, could I do that? And I was like, well, if I was in that situation, I think I would be able to do that. But, you know, I don't have to do that right now. So it does feel very alien.
That's quite a good example. It's quite an extreme example, but yes, what are we capable of so you're drawing on unknown parts of yourself in a way, the part that could overcome that fear of pain what an amazing example.
Yeah, I do tend towards the extreme. When other people, when you look at other people, you notice the different qualities that they have. Some of them are like, yeah, okay, you know, I can feel that, I'm familiar with that. Other qualities they bring, you might feel like, oh, that feels really unfamiliar, or I want more of what that person has, or I can't bear, I don't want any of what that person's bringing. Can you, you know, once people become familiar with voice dialogue, can they, and they're not obviously always living their lives in a facilitated session, you know, you're out and about, you're meeting people, you feel these kind of warm and cold and dark patches over different aspects of people's personalities. You know, can one start to use other people? No, I mean, I use other people in a very, very light sense. I don't mean you're using people as a tool.
You're using other people all the time, Ralph. We all are. So if you go out into a pub and somebody's making a loud noise and you start to get really, really irritated, it's immediately kicking into your own self system around probably that I'm not saying this is necessarily who you are, but I'm using you as a screen to project on that you would be somebody who yourself wouldn't shriek and scream in a pub loudly so that it would disturb other people, for instance, or except at the end of the evening when everyone's doing it anyway. But I mean, you know, in a family pub where people are sitting at a table, there's a certain decorum about behavior. And if we get incredibly irritated, it has to do with also a part of ourselves who's not allowed to do that. That's when we get judgmental. So the judgments about other people, whether it's a positive judgment, like projecting onto somebody that this is something you'd so like to be like them, or the negative judgment that you think, I'm never going to do things that way, I really dislike that. That says a lot about your own disowned parts in your own system.
Yeah, so you can learn a lot about yourself, about how you react to the different traits that other people exhibit.
Yeah, the projections show you, they bring you to your vulnerability very often around something in yourself that you haven't been able to access. It's one of the most important cornerstones of the Stones' work, is how judgments are an integral part of voice dialogue and how that works.
And it's the last thing I wanted to raise was I'd always been a bit I'd never really enjoyed group sharing sessions. Where you sort of, you've got a group of people, everybody's sharing how they're feeling, and sometimes it can get very indulgent, and you're sort of sitting there while someone spends half an hour, talking about things, and then it goes on the next person. Before you know it, 3 hours have gone by, and
3 hours.
Really? No. What I'm making up a hypothetical scenario.
Really?
But then,
have you ever experienced the sharing of 3 hours?
No. So I was saying I'd been a bit wary of it and not really enjoyed it before. But then when I came to do the work with you and these residential weekends, so there's about 20 people, and I think a couple of times a day we would come together, or at least one time a day in the morning. We would come together,
in the morning we would do that.
Yeah, we would do a very in-depth sharing, and for the first time ever, I got how powerful and important that was, and how mysterious too. I kind of, for the first time ever, actually appreciated what an amazing thing that is. And it's a very, very special container that you create. It's very, very safe. Most people there know each other very well, over many years. And people opening up with very, very vulnerable things. But when you see people do that, you realize that we're all so connected and so similar in our pain and hopes and fears and all of that stuff. And when you're in a room with people, they pull back the veil.
Yes.
And you suddenly go, what? You feel really, I've never felt, well, there's a bit of an exaggeration. I felt very, very connected with the people there because of that process. And I was also moved to share things that really surprised me, that I hadn't really shared with people before. And it came out, I kind of, felt, I haven't really got anything to share. But then people start talking, and before I know it, something just comes up, whooshes up from within me, and just comes out, and it's like, whoa. And it was very, very it was an amazing experience for me to do that, and totally changed my view of what group sharing can be like, because I think I'd never done it in such a well facilitated or whatever session. It's not, I mean, it's very organic. It's not like you're there facilitating it per se, but it's
we're holding it. We're making very sure that it's a protected and safe space for the person who's sharing, and there are very, very clear parameters as to if people want to respond to a sharing, it's got to be in an I. It's not about you. There's a lot of parameters, and as somebody shares, we ask the other people in the room to be quiet and respectful, and not suddenly go on their phones or get up during a sharing and go out the door. None of that stuff is allowed, because the point is that this is somebody opening up and saying something that they might, as you say, something comes up suddenly inside. And very often people know it's their time to share when their heart starts to beat faster. That something manifests. And again, it's not always within your control. You might decide before you go to the weekend, look, I've been having a really hard time around this issue with my younger sister. I hope I'm going to be able to work on that in the weekend. And that might come into being. That might really be your soul's purpose. That might be what's going to happen. But it might be something completely different that suddenly emerges in the sharing that you weren't planning to share, but that somehow your whole being is leading you to be speaking about something you weren't planning to be speaking about. And that's what you're describing. Suddenly I was sharing stuff that and I wasn't planning to do this. It just happened. It came up in me. I had very much the same experience, what you were saying, that
I knew that we'd have these sharing sessions scheduled. And beforehand, I was thinking, oh, is there anything I want to bring up? Well, could bring up that, sort of go in to the session. But then all of the things I thought I might bring up, they all felt dead or something. They had no loosh or life to them. And then something else came up, from out of nowhere, and it was very, very I don't know, and I think I understood, was for the first time, what people can do for each other in a group like that. And it wasn't as if, and as you say, it's not that people were, no one gives advice, or you could do this, or you were there. The only response is that someone, as you say, someone can talk in the first person, like and I, blah, blah, blah. But, a lot of that wasn't going on. It was more the sort of a person share something with the group.
We would respond. Do you remember? We will respond sometimes.
Yeah, but less is in a less is more approach. Yeah.
There have been occasions that people come to our sharings, and that when I or Pete say something, somebody got indignant, like, this is a sharing, how come you guys are saying something? So what I'm trying to say, there is a sharing model which is only sharing, and that's it. And what Pete and I might do, not in every case, just sometimes we just say, one of us would say, oh, thank you for sharing that, and might say something about what it's bringing up for me, or might say, there's one direction that this could take you in, can I say something about that? And the person can say yes or no, and then what comes to one of us as an inspiration, possibly, to continue on from that sharing. And I think people appreciate that, but not always. Sometimes people really love to hear something from us, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
And less is more. I love that. Less is more.
But I really like the way you do it, because as you say, it's not, you don't have like a strict protocol that you never deviate from. No. You have rules, but what I felt in these sessions with these sort of 20 people all sharing, that you kind of get this group mind or something, or group heart, and things come in the moment, things happen, and you can actually respond to those things as they come up in the moment, and in a sensitive way. And it's I've been in other situations where they have very strict protocol and you never deviate from it, and if anybody does, then there's they never get invited back.
Oh wow. No, we do allow mistakes, but I think it's probably not very visible how strong the container is that we create.
Oh yeah, you can feel it.
But that is very much based on a number of no's in the space that actually are, they're named gently, but it's not. I'm that's using this flame in me that I describe. The structure is like this, and if somebody goes over that line, they'll notice me.
Yeah.
There was one occasion, I don't know if you were present, it was quite an interesting occasion, and I was doing, somebody had just shared, and occasionally one of us continues a bit with that person. So it was a sort of tiny mini session during the sharing with somebody. And as this was happening, somebody got up very discreetly to go out to the toilet. Or one person, that's okay. But then a second person got up. And then a third person got up. And it got too noisy and distracting, so that a strong rule of the protocol, which is there, had been broken. So I said to the person, can you just hold on a minute? And I stayed energetically in contact. I said, I'm not having this. I want you all to sit down now. And then I finished the work with this person. And then after that, I said, pee break. And then when some people came back, there were people who were absolutely furious with me because I'd been so directive and authoritarian.
Well,
and it was very interesting because what happened was, there was a going backwards and forwards, and I was saying, well, I'm holding the space, I'm leading the space. I was with her, and what's happening with her, that takes priority over anything. And if you didn't slip out on time to go for a pee, then you'd need to either put your finger up and look at me, and I could nod or something, but do not underestimate what is happening at that point. And then some people were challenging me on that. Look, this is free. This is a free space. It's only happened once. And then I turned to the person and I said, well, give us your feedback. And she said, I had to give up on the group altogether. I was just holding on to your eyes because I couldn't trust them anymore. So she gave back to the group that what they'd done meant that she had to give up on them, that she could only trust me. It was amazing. And then then some people started to calm down. It was because I'd been really I'd shown a bit of my flame to them. Sit down now, like that. I'd been really quite bossy, which I don't like to do, but it was necessary.
It's like the group sharing sessions are a little bit like a kind of fractal of a one-on-one voice dialogue session that
yes, exactly.
We're all becoming sub-personalities, and then your protector comes out in that moment and says,
I'm leading in that.
The rules, the rules. So there's a fuzzy boundary here, but that's been crossed. Just going to flash my flame at you and sit.
Yeah. I've never done that before or since, but it was really interesting because what became clear that a lot of people in the sharing weren't aware of how structured it actually is.
Yeah.
In terms of what is a yes and what is a no,
Yeah.
And it was so lovely that when I asked the person herself, she said, I gave up on the group. Because what you said so beautifully about 5 or 10 minutes ago was that actually it becomes this enormous group space, a group energy, and that's what makes things happen. Like you say, I'm sitting there and suddenly this thing's coming up and I want to share it. It's part of the group energy. The group energy is much bigger than any of us, and it just needs to be monitored and kept safe, and then it will start to happen.
Yeah. And you have too many people going to the loo is like putting a hole in the bubble and letting the air out of it.
A bit, it's really interesting because it is fluid. Because this one person slipped out really discreetly. That's okay. A second one, I thought, but the third and the fourth were starting to make noise, and it became a whole group thing happening. Door open, door closed, door open. It's just not on. You can't. Yeah. It's a bubble, exactly. It's rather like that awful thing about the plastic boat recently. When the air goes out, then it sinks. Yeah.
Well, Trilby, you've been enormously generous with your time, and it's been wonderful to connect with you again, because it's been a couple of years since I've seen you, and thanks so much for sharing your over 40 years of wisdom through doing thousands and thousands of hours of this stuff with so many people, and it really changed my view of myself and other people.
That's so good to hear.
When I encountered the work, and
that's great.
I'm so grateful.
That's so lovely. Thank you. Okay.
And so we've said it before, but just where people can find your work or anything you care about.
Well, there's so many people doing voice dialogue. Our website is Transforming Dialogue. That's what where you can find us. Transforming Dialogue.
Yeah. Cool. And
I have lots of lovely colleagues and people who've been on staff with us. There's quite a group of people who can facilitate.
Yeah. So actually,
students and now apprentices, and have been apprentices on staff, and now they're working in their own right. So there's loads of facilitators sort of gathered around the Blagden cluster.
Yeah, so if someone wanted to find a voice dialogue facilitator in their area, like how would they go about that?
Well, if they get in touch with us, we could let them know. I mean, when I say loads, there's enough people doing voice dialogue sessions at the moment that there would be in their area. I don't know, we're very much southwest England based, aren't we? So I'm not sure about in their area. There hasn't been that much training in there's somebody in London. John Kent works in London. I don't know if he's still active. So that's an area where you could find voice dialogue training. Yeah. Great.
Well, thank you so much, Trilby. Enjoy your evening, and love to Pete. And
all right then.
Yeah, and I do hope we connect again. Soon.
Yeah.
I made all the music that I use in my podcasts. If you'd like to hear more of my music, please visit SoundCloud and check out my profile, Ralph Cree.